Hello and welcome. We're joined today by Neil Petrie, former intelligence officer, direct democracy champion, and author of this seminal new work, One Vote Away, which I might add I've just finished reading for the second time. Also, I'll just add, on a personal note, one of the most erudite and well-read people that I've ever had the pleasure to meet. Welcome, Neil.
Thanks, Damien.
It's lovely of you to be here. Could you just start by telling us a little bit about your background, about yourself?
Yeah, I was an RAF child, a military brat, as they say. So I was born in Germany and travelled the world a lot as a kid. And then I realised I wanted to go in the army myself. My father had been in the Air Force. So I basically learned to gain the confidence for officer selection through going door-to-door selling. And I did that for a few years, about 2 years in fact it was in all. I became a manager and then I volunteered. I went into Sandhurst in 1981 through selection, through that route into the intelligence corps, and then spent some time in the military, 16 years in all. And so I was a very experienced, widely experienced military intelligence officer by the time I finished. And I went into the security industry, very imaginative, change for me there. But I came out at 37 because you can get a pension at that age. And I went off into Civvy Street, working across the Middle East, Central Asia, and in the security industry for most of that time. And then set up my own business with a partner out there, who's still out there, in the Middle East. And I came back to UK because of things I'd seen and developing here. So I was looking at really working on the issues that are covered in the book on direct democracy and other issues as well besides that.
Interestingly, the thing that I really enjoyed about the book is that you've taken autobiographical aspects, certainly your time in intelligence, and interwoven them into the issues that we're facing today, the many very serious issues that we're facing today. Tell us a little bit more about the book, what inspired you. It's such an interesting read, and there's so much we could probably be 12 hours trying to cover all this, but in a nutshell, tell us what inspired you to write the book. I know you've been thinking about it for a long time, and what are the kind of issues that you cover and try and resolve or make suggestions for?
Well, when I was in the army in Germany, I'd heard about direct democracy in Switzerland. Now, I knew about it from the ancient world, Greece and Rome, but then I heard, I'd seen the issues with democracy, that we have, just the general party politics side of it, and I was also against the far left, having heard about the Ukrainian Holodomor when I was a kid, when I was quite young. So I realised that the press we got wasn't giving us the full story, and that would become obviously in my old business, in the intelligence game. So I realised that there were too many issues that are not fully explained. So I spent most of my life after coming out of the army looking into the real history of the world, as it were. So I read very widely and studied it. But I was also a practical man, I had to earn a living. So I wasn't a theorist, I read theory, but I'm not a theorist, I apply theory and see if it works. And often it doesn't, But of course politicians are happy pressing theory because they're not paying the price for it.
Yeah.
But when you're running a business, and I ran a lot of businesses for other people before setting up my own, and you understand, you've got to succeed. And so what you apply, you learn from, and then you move on and improve it. But it was this issue really with direct democracy and the failings, because of the left and the control they had, and also from the right because of the control they had. And the people in the middle aren't heard. You've got the left. If you look at the Democrat Party today, it's completely radicalised after generations of hard left intellectuals steering the academy and turning normal people into radicals, as we see on the streets today. You look at the American election, the last election, and prior to it, Antifa and the trouble they caused, but the lack of judicial sanctions that they received.
Certainly, you can see this in you can see this in the UK, but I think it's really zoomed in now. You can see it in America very clearly in the Democrat Party. The Democrat
Yeah.
Party has almost become the epitome of this.
Yeah.
Just to push you on this, in what ways direct democracy different from the politics that we have now?
Well, in the end, you've got representatives who have basically become the animals of the party entirely, really. So the whips can tell them exactly what to do. And so the unfortunate thing is that you think they're representing you. You know, you vote for them, they go to Parliament, and they get suborned, really. They get sucked into the system. And the parties then take over, and the individuals, if they wish to get promotion, if they wish to stay in that high-paying job with all the opportunities that come along for, you know, posts in companies as directors, etc., you'll toe the party line, you know. And it's not quite the same as the Communist Party, which was, you know, completely disciplined, iron discipline. And the parties now, though, pretty much the people do exactly what they're told. There is no individuality, and if you do, you'll get kicked out like Corbyn was on the left, or Bridgen for the Conservatives. So that there's no real free speech or free thinking for these people. They're allowed a certain leeway, but you don't step out the tram lines. So with direct democracy, basically, instead of being governed by MPs, we become the governors because we have full control of major and important policy issues. Well, that's what happens in direct democracy. The people take over, and so they become our administrators in government, and we are the governed. We are the governed. Yeah. We govern each other. And so the power comes and devolves into the hands of millions of people, and all of those come together to cohere into the will of the people. So instead of having the will of just a small group on the left, and then a few years later swing into a small group on the right, then the difference is that you get a steady ship, teetering, just being steered by everybody, but you're only tapping the tiller. Yeah. You're not swinging over here and then over here again. No, you're just moving it when you're not aligned with your target. So that's the secret, and it has been proven to work in Switzerland for 175 years, and that's what I like about it, that there is an experiment. Yeah. That someone has done this for 175 years, and what's interesting is 1848, you had the Communist Manifesto was put out by Marx and Engels. Yeah. At the same year, you had the start of the Swiss constitutional change to bring the people in to power, where they had a final say on constitutional changes. So I'll just ask you, would you rather live today in communist China or Switzerland? It's a very simple question.
So in indirect democracy, if we take Switzerland as an example, what kind of things do people vote on, and how does that actually work?
Right.
Can you explain the system?
Yeah. Basically, they still have parties, okay? But they have proportional representation. But the parties, are so that you can vote for something that you support, and they'll go in with their own manifesto. But the reality is, every single decision coming out of their parliament, the people have the ability to call a referendum on it. So it's every single policy, you get the opportunity if you can get enough support. So there's a hurdle put in the way. It's 50,000 signatures, roughly 1% of the population. You have to get 50,000 signatures. So that's how you make sure that it's only the important decisions. Yeah. So it's not wasting time on hundreds of small minutiae. Yeah. So that's what the politicians are doing for you, because you still need the donkey work done. Yeah. But interestingly, even with that, their MPs are only working 12 weeks of the year. MPs. Right. Now in Scotland, you've got MSPs and MPs working full time in a £400 million building. Yeah. To come out with decisions that lead to twice the national debt level that the Swiss have to work with. Yeah. So you double the national debt whilst adding more to your cost of government. Yeah. Now, as in Switzerland, you don't have a government, you're the government. The people are the government, and they're the administrators, and they're trying to give you what they think will work. So one of the great things about the referendum system is that every law coming out, they know they've got to produce something half decent. Yeah. It's got to be something that people can look at and say, oh, I can live with that. And if they can't, they'll tell you, because they'll get 50,000 signatures, and they'll have a first past the post referendum. So it's not referendum after referendum, but it's about 4 times a year they vote. But you can vote by post. You know, they don't use electronic at the moment. They're still looking at that. But mainly they vote by post. But if that 4 times a year, you get the opportunity to be in control at canton level, at community level even, in some cases. So in other words, a lot of the work is also devolved down to the canton, or what we would call county level.
Yeah.
So the county guy runs the education system.
Yeah.
So each county could have, like we used to have here, an education system. Now, that means that the people are getting the education that they want, because they've got their hands on the purse strings. Not being told what to do by some educational expert who read a book once about it, you know? No, it's the people deciding, and they reckon they have the best education, I mean independently, that the Swiss have the best education system in the world, because it's a nice mixture of vocational, superb vocational training for people who don't want to be sitting in an office all day.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a great system.
So power is localised.
It's more localised,
yeah.
and it's more controlled. The budgets are more controlled by the people, and the outcomes are better.
And so when people vote for these things, their representatives don't actually have a choice. They vote for what their constituents want, essentially.
No, they're more aligned with that, but they can still, you know, they might vote because they're in what do you call it, proportional representation.
Yeah.
They'll also be voting maybe more on their party lines.
Yeah.
But they're also having to negotiate with the other parties more closely, so that they know it's got to be more amenable to the people.
Yeah.
And in fact, you know, like the president there, they just rotate every year.
Yeah.
So they have 7 different people in the cabinet, as it were, from different parties, and they're proportionally represented largely. And the president is just a nominal annual appointment. One of those 7, they just rotate. It's your turn, and they hand over presidency, because they're just there to administer, and it makes no real difference who the president is. So it's a very different system. But one of the other great things about direct democracy, you know, Swiss style, but it's similar to Taiwan now. Taiwan has a similar system, and Estonia has a similar system. But the initiative is where you can, you as a citizen, can say, oh, I want this law in place. I don't like the central bankers, and I don't like this central banker digital currency. You can write a petition, take it to the government. They say, well, take it out and get your signatures. But because you're just an individual citizen, you have to get twice the number of signatures, 100,000, and you've got, you know, a bit longer than you have to get the signatures for when it's coming out of Parliament. But then that could become a law. They generally don't, to be honest. But the point is, everyone can let off steam, or they can put forward an idea that's adopted by the country. So it could become, your law could become law there.
Right.
If you get the 100,000 signatures, there's another first past the post referendum, and if you win it, bang, that law is yours. And the no cash society disappears in the rearview mirror.
So can you give us, I should say, an example of where the Swiss have implemented an initiative?
Well, one of the more controversial ones, you might say, most recently, was they would not allow the building of minarets, and that was begun as an initiative, and so the people then obviously backed it. So there are controls on, you know, what the people can and cannot do within the, what would you call, the Constitution. But, you know, you are asking to amend the Constitution here, and the Constitution accepted. That was accepted by the political powers, and also accepted, you know, by the people, and they voted for that. But I think it's only about 15% of all initiatives are accepted.
It's interesting that you've talked about the parallels between this system and the Marxist system, you know, the 175 years since they both started. And we can see what that system has done throughout the world, the amount of debt it's accumulated. Why do you think there seems to be such a resistance? There seems to me, anyway, to be a resistance against the direct democracy movement, or a kind of, even by common people, of, well, you know, we've got a two-party system, this seems fair. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a natural inclination for people, a bit of black and white, and also there's a lot of, you know, miseducation or non-education about Switzerland, about Taiwan, about Estonia, which has digital direct democracy. So it's not covered because the powers that be will lose out. Now, on the left, you've got to have a vanguard party to take control, because then you can implement all of your policies that no one really wants. You put it under, the nice values of equity and fairness and all the rest of it, but in fact, it's going to be, to get rid of those people who don't agree with you, you end up having to kill them. Hence, there's 100 million dead Bill, and the Uyghurs are being killed now and imprisoned, across China. So the reality is that with direct democracy, it's a threat to the party system. They know it, I say, but the parties, as I've said, are the vehicles in the end of the interests behind them, because they can, if you can control the party, and the party will be controlled by a few people. It's always the case that any organisation, and Robert Michaels wrote about this in 1915. He was a Germanist who studied the socialist and other parties, and he discovered he came up with what is called the iron law of oligarchy. So any major corporation, any major organisation like the UN or political parties come under the control in the end of a small number of people. And so when that happens, the left they understand this and they'll take control. And that's why they always fail. But the problem is you get 70 years of misery in the Soviet Union to find that out in the Soviet Union. And I've lived in that part of the world, for several years. Now, with representative democracy, the very rich as well get control of the parties. And that is why direct democracy became quite popular in the United States in the 1880s through to the early 1900s. So 49 of the US states also used direct democracy to change their constitution. You have to have a referendum to make any changes. But they've never had a national vote. The big parties retain control, and they are there as the mouthpieces of the money men and other interests. Even the Democrats now, the military-industrial complex, and all of this is covered, quite in some depth in this volume. I cover the assassinations of, Kennedy, the assassinations of Martin Luther King, and I give you links even to the trial of the people who were accused and found guilty of assassinating Martin Luther King. The links are in there. You won't find these in normal discourse. You won't find them on the net easily.
Yeah.
But I've read a great deal and did my own investigations into this and the background of it. And I just give you the links. Go and check for yourself. Because as an intelligence operator, my job is to look at possibility and probability more than definitely. Yeah. The chances of finding out something definitely, as we all know in this world, are extremely difficult, even in science. That's why you've got Karl Popper, who I cover in the book, and his idea about the falsifiability of practically anything. Yeah. So, 2 + 2 = 4. Yeah, we agree on that, but maybe in some new maths classes today, that's not the case. Yeah. And when you're looking at science, we should be able to agree on those things. But when you're looking at weather, climate, it's settled science suddenly, because the people are saying what you want to hear, so it's now settled. Yeah. No, maybe that was wrong. I've got a novel which shows a picture of a frozen world back from the 1980s. Because the threat then was global freezing.
That's right.
You see?
That's right.
Now we're into obviously this. So, the climate changes. We all know that. That's why you have ice ages and interglacials. So
I just coming interesting. I saw an interview with the girl from North Korea, Yeonmi Park.
Oh right, yes.
And she says, when she was doing maths in school, she was asked 2 and 2 is what's 1 and 1? She said 2. She goes, and the teacher said, no, our leader has worked out that 1 and 1 is 1. If you take one piece of water and you put it into another piece of water, it becomes one piece of water. So this is
high level maths, yeah.
Yeah. Oh. So just about those assassinations. I mean, is a fascinating topic. How does that connect? Just explore that a little bit for us. You're talking about the assassinations and how that connects to the issues.
Yeah. Well, you've got to think that the money men decided that they had to have more control, obviously, over the tax and the money of the government. Yeah. They wanted to ensure that they had stable industries and they had large markets to sell them. So that meant going abroad. So that was the start, really, of the military-industrial complex. But it had already gestated, as it were, as a normal, the railroads, getting them built, getting public funding again, you see, and using the government to ensure that they had protected interests. So they become monopolists.
Yeah.
And they take control of the banks. JP Morgan took over Equitable Life Insurance because that gave him access to new money every month. Every month the money comes sliding into the pot and he can put it where he wants, into his banks. There's nothing going into somebody else's. So it's the moneyed interests that started taking control of the capital of the United States. And then that took them into controlling the policies through having appointees in government and senators who were bankers, etc., to make sure that the rules gave them control of the Fed. They set up the Fed, which had collapsed 80 years before, and they reintroduced it nearly 100 years after, about 80 years after the last one had been finished off by President Jackson. So these moneyed interests are what control the military-industrial complex. And after the Second World War in particular, the grand area had been decided upon during the Second World War. This grand area is the area that the Americans must control for the resources for their economy. And these are huge swathes of the planet. Hence why you saw the assassinations in Africa, in the Congo, Allende in Chile getting removed. Now, most of these people were elected, funnily enough, as well. They were popular figures, same in Mossadegh in Iran. But it was the industries were going to be lost, the resources, the access to the resources. So it's this resource battle that we still see going on today. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they wanted everything. So the Ukraine war is a proxy war to try and bring down, as they have said themselves, it's a regime change war to get rid of Putin. But what does that mean? Access to Russian resources. This is what it's really about. And that's what happened with the development during the 50s and 60s by the Dulles brothers in particular of the policies of interference in all these other states and strong-arm tactics to do so, and the killing of those figures, as I said, in some of these countries. But it spread, obviously, because Kennedy stopped the Vietnam War, or the troops were going to be pulled back. He'd made that decision, that had been applied. When he was assassinated, Johnson came in and sent in 500,000 troops in the end almost. But Martin Luther King was seen as another threat, and he was gunned down. And in the court in Memphis, November the 15th to December the 8th, 1999, there were teams were found guilty of the killing of it. And these were CIA, FBI, local Memphis police, and special forces gun teams, and elements of the mafia. And there's a court case, but you won't hear about it. But you can go and find the trial transcripts. You've got the links in there to the trial transcripts, also to the Observer, who covered the whole trial, who wrote a superb book on the JFK killing, which is recommended by Robert Kennedy now, JFK and the Unspeakable, by James Douglas, I think his name was. So this is the resource. There's other books as well on this, Plausible Denials, an excellent one on the JFK shooting. So you can find these, and you can find the links to the trial transcript and also to the King family statements. There was no other press person there at the trial, Douglas and one Portuguese lady journalist. No other press were interested. So this is the level of the issues that we face, and the enemies that there are against the people. So direct democracy would take away that power over the parties, you see? Because instead of having to just negotiate with a few senators to get that vote, you've got to persuade the whole people, millions of them. That's not happening. This is what you dilute power and spread it around. Like Obama said, let's spread it around. But the power, okay, let's spread the power around, and then that's what you get. You get a Swiss-style system. Is it perfect? No. We're talking human beings here. But it's a darn sight better because you've got control as the people. You've got control of basically the education system, which gives you the future for your families and the industries that you can operate and succeed in. So that's why direct democracy works, because it's the people are in control, and they have the policies have to suit them. They're governing. They're not the governed. You don't need the consent of the governed. That is the consent of the governed, because they can, pull the hat out of the bag themselves. And I think for UK in particular, I want us to be leading in this game. I believe that A.V. Dicey, our greatest constitutional lawyer, back in the 1880s and the 1890s, he had seen what the Swiss were doing for about 40 years, and he didn't like it at first. He was against the referendum, and then he realised, actually, you know, this is working, and our party system, even then under the Victorians, was failing. He could see the issues, and they didn't have everybody voting then, but he could see the control of the parties from outside, and he basically came out and said, I'm backing the referendum system, and I'm saying we should get rid of the House of Lords. So get rid of the House of Lords and give the people the final say on all important constitutional issues. And the Swiss have shown us how you can find out what's important to the people by this referendum system with the, you know.
Yeah. Is this a movement that's gathering a lot of support in the UK, do you feel?
Well, as soon as you talk to people about it and explain its simplicity and what comes out of it, you get, it's a lot easier than Brexit, you know, because the average person on the left sees it and the right, you know, who are not radicals, okay, and some will trot out the party line, as it were, because if you're hard left, you think, the party's losing control here, you know, and you know they haven't got the consciousness, have they? You know, the masses don't have the right consciousness for the left,
right.
you know. And on the right, they think you're sick plebs, you know. That's what they think. Now, the reality is, of course, that the average punter out there does very nicely in life when he's given a good education. Okay, but when you've got the advantages that some people have in life, they seem to look down their noses at other people, which they should not do. You know, as an intelligence officer, I can tell you, you know, I've seen some thick officers and some very good officers, but I've seen thick taxi drivers and intelligent taxi drivers as well, as you know. So it's the opportunity to get a good education helps, obviously, but it's also the appropriate education. And that's what the people decide in Switzerland. That's why they've got the best education system on the planet. Not just university, vocational too.
And you're developing, I mean, I've been impressed by the simplicity of the kind of digital voting system that you're trying to develop.
Yeah.
You know, just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's not word developing. We did try one, and ours was rubbish. You know,
Right.
it was. Yeah, we are not experts, and we came out with one, but the concept was very similar to what a guy called Richard Borner had been working on separately entirely. We didn't even know about his plans, but he'd worked at CERN in Switzerland, funnily enough. So he's the Hadron Collider guy, okay, and that's where also the internet came from.
Right.
It was, you know, Berners-Lee had worked there. So he had developed this using blockchain. Now, blockchain means once you've given your vote, they're all stacked up and linked, and you can't fiddle around with them. So again, this will not be popular with, you know, people who want to fiddle the votes. So, you know, as they're all saying about, it's not about, you know, the votes, it's about who's counting the votes, isn't it, you know? Yeah. So that's how you find out if your vote counts, you know. So with this system, they can't fiddle with it. It's the same, basically, technology that you'd use for banking and transferring money about, so it's very secure. But there's no perfect system, but this is the best that I've seen. It's better than any of the government ones, and we've looked into those as well. Because believe it or not, there was a European system that was developed by the EU, but they didn't tell us.
Yeah.
They've got a system, you know, for direct democracy, and it's not pushed. I'd never heard of it until after Brexit, and it's been going for years. But the one that we've got, or that we work with, is Richard's one, which is blockvote, blockvote.org.
And so this is something, you know, when it comes time for you to vote on an issue, you just got it on your phone, and you just vote. There you go.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
Well, the aim is to use it. It's a demonstration vehicle as much as anything to educate people on direct democracy. Yeah. So you can say, here you go, this is how it works, you know, and you can access this very simply. Yeah. And we've got a simple little video to show you how to do it. Yeah. And local independent candidates can use this, you see, as a way of introducing direct democracy, and also saying to people, I'm going to be putting votes on this about that bypass. You know, or about the parking rules, about the new hospital, or whatever it is. So a local candidate can put these on, so you'll end up with, you know, the people able to vote, and he'll say, okay, I see what you want, you know, and I'm voting on that in the council. Yeah. So, or you know, if we get an MP, then the MP can start doing that. Now that'll be the day. You know, when you see an MP who's directed by his constituents, because at the moment they're directed by who? The whips. Yeah. So what do you want? Do you want a whip telling all of the MPs what to do, or do you want the constituents telling their MP what to do? Someone's telling them.
I mean, I think that could be a real turning point in kind of popularising this. Is this when local people realise that they can take an issue like the bypass,
Correct.
like the park,
Correct.
something what's happening in the park, and they can say, look, we want to vote on this. We want you to think about this.
Yeah.
We want you to take this issue forward.
Yeah.
You know, I think that could be a big turning point.
Well, that's the plan, and I believe it is we call it the game changer, because suddenly, people say, I'm not heard, my voice is not heard.
That's right, yeah.
That is the problem. But why shouldn't the MP listen to the people?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought that was the idea. He's your representative, but he's not really. He's the representative of the party being told
whip.
what to do
Yeah.
by the whip.
Yeah.
That's it. It's quite clear. And, I've got that recording of Rory Stewart where he explains this, that they go into the chamber not even knowing what they're voting on.
That's right.
At times.
That's
but
right.
they know what the whip told them. They don't know what they're voting on, and they've never read it.
Yeah.
So why don't we just tell the people, we'll tell you what to do. Thank you very much. You go and do what we want.
Yeah.
And you can do it through an app like this, or some other way of gathering it, but that's how it works. And the Estonians use a system like this. It's that European one I mentioned before that was hidden from the British.
Yeah.
We started developing that long, long ago. And it was only through our investigations, using a guy who's excellent in technology and had worked in the field and knew some people in that arena, he found out. And he went through the email trail, and he saw how, in fact, the civil servants had tried to take the government to court because they stopped them working on it. And the Brits said, no, we don't want it. Our government. Yeah. So you're talking about, I think it's the Cameron era, if I remember correctly. Right. They don't want direct democracy. They know exactly, it's a threat to all of these, we'll get planning permission for that, and we'll save you taxes on that, and then I'll get a job with you. Like the military-industrial complex, the rotation. It's a rotating dictatorship, or it's a revolving door for jobs. It's all about revolving. Yeah. And the Fed in America, these guys go in and become the treasury guy in the American system. And in fact, the Fed, the New York Fed, controls pretty much the planet because it controls the central banks, because it's in control of the largest, funds in the world. And these small groups decide for us about central bank digital currency, about collapsing the credit system, because then that collapses the companies and they can take control of companies that fail, buy them up, etc. And this is done deliberately. It was done deliberately by Bissell, 1830s, 1820s, when he was in charge of the second bank of the United States, and he used the credit and its restriction as a weapon to try and fight President Jackson when Jackson was trying to deal with the bankers, because he saw what they were. And I've looked at the charts for United States kind of economy during the time after the bank was taken out, the Fed, the earlier version of the Fed. And for nearly 80 years, the American economy kept going up and down, but always climbing. And then within 15 years of the Fed being set up in 1913, you get the Depression. The collapse is massive. You can see, watch the charts, just like that, and then suddenly it goes down like this. Yeah. And it takes them another 10 years to get back up to where they were before. And this is after you've introduced the Fed, which is there to stabilise things, supposedly. So the reality is that the bankers have proven that without a Fed, the American economy improved with smaller adjustments. And then it's only after the introduction of the Fed you get this massive crash. And like the ones we've had now, the central bankers are desperate to control everything. They don't want a regime change, they want world change, and they're in control. And this is the issue. And with direct democracy again, this is how you end it. This is how we end it. And that's why everything's about international now, because the whips are told what to do now by the party controllers, who are really the international whips, for the guys working for these huge, multi-trillion dollar operations like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. These are the guys who are running the planet through ESG now.
Yeah.
ESG.
So ESG has become such a huge thing, hasn't it, for companies?
Yeah, exactly. But it's coercion, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a form of blackmail.
Yeah.
Why should the people have to take this?
Yeah.
So, but the great thing is, they've told us we live in a democracy. See? This is the secret.
Yeah.
Is they've said, oh, you're a democracy. All right, then what happens if we all have independent candidates who suddenly become answerable and happily answerable to their community that they come from? They're not parachuted in MPs from somewhere else. No, they're local people who like their local community and they get elected, rather as they do in Switzerland, and they control it. Suddenly, imagine all around Europe and other countries, you've got these Swiss-style governments. These clowns in America who are trying to steamroller through Ukraine and all the rest of it, which I just heard today, the war might be being declared over because there's pressure on Zelensky to pull the plug and to give up and just accept, because there's a new war coming, isn't there? That one in Israel. So they've got to get that one off now. They get out of the Taliban war where they lost. They're losing to men in flip-flops and sandals, like they did in Vietnam. But how much money was spent in each of these wars? Okay?
Yeah.
That's the problem. So the American industrial complex makes a fortune out of the taxpayer and then passes the bill on to the taxpayer. And then they've got to keep paying the debt to the bankers again. So they're paying interest on top of paying for the equipment. That's what happened. We've all been suckered. Okay? It's a democratic delusion. And it's the representative delusion. And it's the multicultural delusion. So this is where direct democracy gives us the chance to put a brake on these changes and to basically throw a sea anchor over the side to slow down the ship of state as it sails on, because these clowns will steer us onto the rocks. They're doing it all the time now. And how many hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are they willing to sacrifice? And Russians, Where's the next one?
Yeah.
Who's going to be going out to Israel? Iraq. Oh, sorry, no, it's Iran, isn't it, this time? No, they're similar spelling. I could have got them mixed up. But, they're going to be after Iran. That's it. And this is the problem. And with direct democracy, you end that control. Can you see Biden, leading a successful war?
No.
And what's a successful war anyway? Hundreds of thousands dead on either side. No real resolution. But a lot of kit was sold.
So with today being Remembrance Sunday, of course, the pro-Palestinian marches, you've mentioned the situation in the Middle East. What are your thoughts on that situation? Hamas, Israel, Iran. What are your thoughts on what's happened, where it's going? What are the risks? What's going to happen from this?
Well, obviously my thoughts in terms of it's a tragedy, another war, and I'm an ex-soldier. I understand the issues that arise out of that, and we're the ones who rather avoid them if we can, because we understand what comes from them. And from my perspective, I look at it, obviously they've got their issues over there, but they are reflected here now, as we've seen with the issues with Hamas and the support for it in the UK, and the issues that arise from that, because again the left are linked into this to some extent as well, because you've got, it's not only the Muslims who are marching, you've got this a lot of people who are supporting mainly on the left, I'd say primarily. So these two groups, you have the issue with the left that they are pushing an agenda of their own, which is not the agenda of Hamas. I'd warn the left, or remind them what happened in Iran after the revolution. The revolution was really started to some extent, or was certainly pushed along by the leftists, the secular leftists in Iran, the Tudeh party. And these people were, after the revolution was successfully carried through, they were brought in by the revolutionaries and all taken into prison. And because they had left Islam, because they had supposedly apostatized, that's a capital offence under Islamic law. It doesn't matter which, they're Shia, and the Jafari school of law is the major school of law for the Shia. They only have one major school, they've got 3 other minor ones. But that major school says you should execute ex-Muslims. So they had 8,000 of these communists in prison. So over a matter of 2 months, they executed 8,000 apostates. That's what they looked on the mass. It wasn't because they were communists, it's because they had left Islam. Because some of these ex-Muslims who had not been brought up in Muslim families, were just imprisoned.
Yeah.
But others were executed. So it's indicative of the legal issues that Islam has with, if you leave the religion. And you don't get a health warning in this country. If you convert one day, if this country, was to become Islamic State, you'd be facing execution like those. And there's about 12 or 13 countries around the world that institute this. And there are others that institute it not through law, but through just direct action, you might say, from the community. And including, in the UK, you get ex-Muslims have to hide in this country now.
Yeah.
Now, so the left have got to understand, you go and wave these supports for Hamas, well, that's what these leftists did, in Iran.
Yeah.
And they ended up being the victims. Now, with the Muslims here in this country, de jure, they don't control things, but de facto, they control their own communities to a large extent. And again, they're mainly Sunni, and the Sunni have 4 major law schools, the Hanafi, the Maliki, the Shafi, and the Hanbali. And these 4 schools of jurisprudence, as they're known really, they all agree on, as they do with the Shia, on the killing of apostates. Hence the problems that ex-Muslims in this country have. So what's interesting is that those killings in Iran were investigated by Geoffrey Robertson, who's the leading, or certainly one of the leading, genocide and human rights lawyers, in Britain. He's on television regularly, and he has his own Doughty Chambers. It's the largest human rights practice in Europe. So he did an investigation into that, and he came up with the statement in his book, which he wrote, called Mullahs Without Mercy. And in it he makes the point that those who leave the religion they were born into become part of what is known as a group under the definitions of the Genocide Convention. So in other words, all apostates are protected under the genocide laws. So what you've seen in Iran was genocide of those 8,000. But where you see all of our Islamic lawyers support this, that this is a genocide, direct genocidal threat to our ex-Muslims in Britain. Hence why they have to go and run and hide. And you hear of the honour killings, but there's a mixture in there. It's honour, but it's also maybe that they've indicated they're leaving the religion.
Right.
And you and I, we know people who have left the religion.
Yeah.
So those people are under threat in this country and go in hiding. Yeah. Some families are more reasonable about it, but when you go into the community today, Ed Hussein, for instance, who was an advisor to Tony Blair, in fact he sounds like him, but Ed Hussein wrote a book called Among the Mosques. It's a very interesting read and I can recommend it, because he shows that the radicalisation is not just a few guys online, it's much more widely based, and that he went to, I think it's 12 mosques around the country, so he got a feel from Northern Ireland, Scotland, down into Wales and across England, and he saw that the situation was worse than he'd realised. This is only a couple of years old, this book, but he made the point that there was much more of a caliphate, type thinking, that we must have this in place, and so in other words, the threat to the ex-Muslims in this country is growing. It's not going to go lower, it's going to go worse, but that's a genocidal threat.
Yeah.
So, we have to look very carefully at the senior jurists within the Islamic community, because under their laws, they should all be supporting killing ex-Muslims. That's the law. That's what it's telling them. And they're the guys who advise the communities, because under Islamic law, from the Quran and also from Muhammad, it's clearly stated, that they are the guides, and you are to take their advice. Now, of course, they don't all take it. We all know guys who go out for a beer and all the rest of it, but that is less true than it was. And so, the reality is that people have this idea that it's a peaceful religion, but you've just got to look through history. And if you go back to North Africa, and you'll see there are Christian Copts in Egypt, a few left now, a percentage, maybe 10. That was all Christian. All along the Mediterranean coast were the Christians. Okay? They're all gone now. Where have they all gone? Well, you see, there was a group called the Almohads, who would end up, these are Berber people, who would end up running that region and also take over Spain as well. Al-Andalus, as it was then. This was all about the time of the Norman conquest. that era, and just a bit after. And the Almohads basically said to the Jews or the Christians, right, okay, we shouldn't be killing you under law, but we're radicals basically. And if you want to stay here, you're going to convert, or if you don't want to stay here, you're going to have to leave. So there are no Christians across North Africa for that reason.
Yeah.
So in other words, all you need is a more radical group to take over, and they can apply the law as they wish.
Yeah.
Now you don't see that across the West today, because the defining point in our history, I believe, is the moment that religious tolerance started across the West. That's when you get freedom of speech and freedom of the press, because you had to be able to discuss these changes that came about through the through Luther, really. 15, 17, here I stand, you know, I can do no other. And so you got this separation then, and you got the growth of tolerance, real tolerance in terms of, you know, speech, the press, assembly, and, you know, to petition your government. The 5 big freedoms that you get, and these are, you know, these are the basis of the Americans' First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. So if they're the big 5, and you cannot apostatize in Britain from Islam, you'll be threatened, you'll be killed, and that the threat for that is increasing, and it's a genocidal threat. And what are our government doing? Are they warning people converting to Islam? Are they looking at that and dealing with it? No, they're covering it up. These people are hidden. They're not, the attention is not drawn to them, because the government of the day will not face it. Just as Chamberlain, and before him Baldwin, would not face the issues. And they knew, if you read it's about the Wilderness Years by Martin Gilbert, who was Churchill's biographer, and he makes the point. Baldwin actually stated that Churchill, we know Churchill will take over when the balloon goes up. Words to that effect. They knew that Winston would be the man that the people would look to. But they didn't do anything, because they wanted to keep the economy ticking over. That was it. They'd get elected, they carried on. Because it's party before nation. This is the whole point. You try that in a direct democracy.
Yeah.
See, we have to take control. It's not about we, you know, it's an option. We have to be in control, or the future just gets bleaker.
Yeah.
It will get bleaker.
Yeah.
I guarantee it. That's my intelligence assessment. And, you know, I have to state it, because, you know, it's dishonest to look at it, you know, and not come up with that assessment. And I'm not dishonest, you know. I believe, you know, my assessment can be discussed. You come up with better arguments, but I've thought this for quite some time. I've studied that religion, and I know I've been in that part of the world for decades, you know, and I've got friends from Central Asia right the way through to the Middle East.
Yeah.
You know, I've set up company in India and in the Middle East. I've done that. I've worked across all these regions. So I have a fellow feeling for the Muslims. You know, I like the people I meet. However, I don't agree with killing people who change their religion. You know, and I see it as the defining point about the West. And if we can't defend that right here in our country, then we need to find people who will. That's it. And I believe that with direct democracy, you'll find we're made of sterner stuff again, you know, and we will face up to these issues sooner rather than later, at the cost of, you know, the cost that there will be, that we can all understand. So do it now.
Neil Petrie, 1 vote away. Get it. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Damien.